All right, and we'll probably get on. So this particular one's a little bit different to usual in that we're going to make it a little bit more interactive. I've got a few slides with some dot points on, which I might bring up first, and it's a bit of a prompt to start this. It can be a very wide-ranging topic, so it might be something that we do more than one of, but I think we've got enough people here that do mineral photography on a regular basis that we should be able to get some decent discussion and hopefully some questions from people that want to learn a bit more as well. So I might just do a share screen initially for that. Let's see this one. Can you see that okay?
Yep.
Yes. Yep.
I've actually got other little windows in the way at the moment, so I'll just move things around a bit. All right, so the first thing that probably bears some mention is the actual subject itself. A lot of these dot points were put together based on, what I see with not just other people's photos sometimes, but also some of my own, because I don't always follow the rules, if you like. And you get to the end and you might have put a fair bit of effort, like up to an hour or more, on a particular photo, and then realise that you didn't clean it properly and you've got a nasty bit of lint or something right across the middle of the image. So having a good quality and a clean specimen with as little damage as possible is obviously a big thing. Composition, how it looks. You can get things that are really good specimens that look pretty crappy just because they're way off center, focal points on the side, or there's a big blurry area or whatever. Lighting's important in getting that right in terms of color, temperature, and so on. And contrast, and then depth of field. A number of photos that you see when you're working at this sort of level can have blurry edges in places that where you probably should have gone a little bit further. If we're talking about stacking, for instance, you probably should have had a few more photos in the stack. Then if we can have a chat about the equipment. So what do we use in terms of optics? Some people use lenses, some people use microscope lenses attached to cameras. Some people use the microscope itself. We've got obviously various different types of cameras that can be used. You can use, iPhone or equivalent, right through to high quality, very expensive full frame cameras and various things in between. The operation of the camera. So do you use a remote? Do you have it tethered to your computer? Do you just click the button? All those sort of things. Maybe a chat about the different microscopes that people actually use. And in terms of lighting, in this particular instance, it's what lighting is used for the actual photography. And then you look at some of the associated tools. So you've got photo editing tools. There's various ranges of things there. I'd always put this one in, save the original work on a copy. You don't want to actually save over the top of the original and then realise you've made mistakes. What sort of adjustments do people do and how much cropping? And then for post-production, it's more about the usage. So what do you want to use these photos for? And that can dictate, in some instances, what equipment you get, the approach that you take, and so on. So I'll just go out of there for gone. Sorry, I have lost Zoom now. There we go. Sorry about that. I don't know what happened then. I lost where I was. So that was just a bit of a few thoughts to start up. If anybody else has got things that they'd like to add to that, happy to include those as well. So Gerhard. Oh, okay, he's had a few attempts and he's given up. So, yeah, if we use that as a basis, it's probably. I mean, there's a lot just in stacking alone, and that's probably worthy of a separate session, I would think. One of the reasons that I say that is that, and I've taken, I know Richard Bell, I took Richard through a couple of things that he didn't know about that can help in fixing certain little problems and so on. When you get, halos and splodges and all sorts of artifacts in the stacked images, but that probably should be a separate session. So I don't know if the consensus is similar or not.
Yeah.
Yep.
No problem.
All right.
Sure.
Might go to equipment first. So in terms of, I might just say what I use first, and then other people can chime in as well. So I have, for most of my photos, I use this, which is a Canon camera on the back end, extension tubes running through to here, and then I have a super macro lens on the front with a ring light sitting on the front of that.
How close is the specimen then?
It's about that much, so probably 15 mil, 12 to 15 mil.
So what is the lens then?
The lens is, well,
Is it like 100 or more?
let's just take the ring light off. So I don't take it apart very often either. So that's the lens. It's a Zhongyi Mitakon Super Macro. So it's a Chinese lens. I've been using it for about 3 years, and it's really good quality. It's set at either 4 times or 4.5 times, and I tend to use it on 4. It's got an aperture setting that runs through from 2 to 6, f2 to f16, and I normally leave it on f5.6, which gives me. Hang on, sorry, Gerhard's
So it's a dedicated super macro lens. It's not.
a dedicated.
I have a 40 millimeter macro. If I put on that much extension tubes, I'd be scratching the lens.
No, it's dedicated super macro. It's very, very good. I think at the moment they're available for around about 199 US or thereabouts, which is a little bit less than when they first came out, but yeah, it's certainly a pretty good quality. Now that with that amount of extension tubes, that gives me images. The width of the image is about 3.5 millimeters. So it's a pretty small area. It means you've got to be able to get light in, and the ring light does a pretty good job of that, given that the working distance is enough to get the light down. But if you've got a very deep vug, it's very difficult to get enough light in. But most specimens are okay.
How do you decide how many or how long your extension should be?
Well, I base it more on what the end result is going to be. So if I'm taking photos of very small specimens, then I just leave it set with all of the, like 2 sets of extension tubes. I leave it set up like that. If I need to, if I've got bigger crystals, there's 2 different ways that I deal with that. One of those is that I obviously reduce the number of tubes, and I've got a notebook with what the width of the image is going to be, depending on how many extension tubes I've actually got connected. So if I've got like 7 millimeters that I want as the field of view that I want to work to, then I'll drop it down by X number of extension rings. The other thing that I tend to do is I have here it's a Canon lens. It's a 28 to 80 millimeter lens, so it's a pretty average lens. It's an old one. This is one that would have originally been used.
60 millimeter.
It's 28 to 80, It was originally around, this particular one it's a refurbished one, was originally around when it was only print cameras, film cameras, not digital, but it's in very good condition. And what I do with this one is I sit just one segment of the extension tube on it and can do up to about 1.5 or 3 or so centimeters. So for slightly larger, more macro shots, and I'll give you an example of that. Just bear with for a second. Just bring up a particular image I'll show you. So it's taking a second to find it. Computer's a bit slow this morning. Must be a bit too early for it. No, here we go. Just open that up and open that. So I'll do a share screen. And is that right? So this here, that's about, I don't know, 32 to 35-ish millimeters across from there to there. So it's a thumbnail sort of size specimen. This particular one's actually a bornite after pyrite from South Australia. It's quite a nice one. But that was taken using the other lens, just with one extension tube on. So everything else is the same. Still had a ring light on the front. I still had a sitting. Actually, I'll bring up the shot of what I currently use. So right at the moment, yeah. Oop, too far. So I might just go back a step and just show you a little bit about how things have changed for me over time. So I'll share screen again, and so this is back in, you can see that one okay? This is back in 2006. So that's the photo that I got, and it would have just been a single shot photo as well of a Levine. And that's my microscope, which is an Olympus microscope. And I had a Sony, I think, point and click camera on a tripod. And this is one where the lens goes in and out as you turn it on, the lens goes out. So I had a little bit of cardboard tube here sitting over the eyepiece, so it actually went into that and didn't damage the the microscope or the camera, but wasn't a bad way to go at the time. But you can see here, rule number 1, I actually had some crap in the on the specimen. Then I moved probably towards doing it one of two ways. So this one here was you can see there's a stack rail there with extension tubes with a macro lens, just a normal macro lens. And the other one that I've done is you can get these on eBay. It's called a microscope camera, I think. So the optics are not as good as a decent lens, but put that on the front of your camera and that sits in the eyepiece. I still use that for if I'm taking a fluorescent shot. Reason being is because my Canon, my 5DSR has an issue with fluorescence, and it gives everything a pink cast, whereas the older camera that got the 750D doesn't. That works fine. So any fluorescent shots, I use that in the microscope.
The pink cast is because you need a UV filter, which I said I have a hard time finding, but
Yeah, I've tried using various ways to filter it. Apparently, the 5D range has been a problem for a number of other people as well. So there's a lot of people trying to fix it, but not successfully.
not Canon though.
Even with sort of normal photos, if I take like a cabinet size specimen under UV with my 100mm f2.8 macro lens with a UV filter, I still have the same problem. So
Because a lot of the UV filters don't actually filter any UV.
yeah. Anyway, it's something you get around. So I've even experimented with things like this one, which is it's a CMOS thing that sits in the eyepiece or a trinocular part of your microscope. Supposedly 34 megapixel. It's crap. It's no better than any 5 megapixel camera. So don't believe what you actually see. And then, what I end up with is this is my setup. So there's my Canon. In this case, it's only got half the extension, one set of extension tubes on with the super macro on the front. I have a three-way stage here, micrometer stage, sitting in a vise on the corner of my desk. And the camera sits on a stack of books. Plus I have, sorry, I use these things which are, they're like a dampener. I have those underneath the books, and I have one underneath each leg of my desk, and just to try and reduce any vibration. It doesn't reduce at all, but it does help a bit. And then I wind the specimen away from the lens using this particular one here, step by step. So it's all manual. I don't have a automated stack shot or anything. But it does a pretty good job for me.
So Steve, could you talk a little bit more about the three-way stage and what you put the actual specimen on to orient it the way you want? Because that's part of my issue.
So the first thing that I do is I have something like this, if you can see it. So this is one of those. You have a rare earth magnet.
Steve, can you show yourself instead of the screen, because I don't see what you're doing?
Sorry, yes, I can do that. I'll just stop.
Yeah, thanks.
You can put Steve on speaker view. You'll see him better.
Yeah, that's okay. So so this is this ring, this washer here is actually a rare earth magnet, one of the really strong ones. You just pull it off, and that sits on a ball bearing type thing, which allows the washer to move around. And then I have there's a metal disc there and that's glued to a plastic, a piece of plastic with mineral tack on it, and that sits on top. So you can just move it around like that to the position.
Mineral tack doesn't sag during the photos?
No, not for me. It would if you had a very heavy specimen potentially. But this is not blue tack. This is the proper.
I use blue tack and it doesn't move anything. No.
Yeah, it's this stuff that you can
Okay.
purchase.
I tell you, it does move in the electron microscope, but we're not using that.
Yeah.
So
I have found that it does sag a little bit, but the amount that it's sagging drops off over time. So if you wait a few minutes, it gets better.
right. So what I do is I actually set it up. I hold it more or less like that underneath my microscope, because I'm looking down on the microscope, and when I'm doing the photography, I'm doing it horizontally, and I line it up to roughly where I think it is that I want to do it. So if I have a specimen like, so the specimen just sits on there like that, and once I've actually got it lined up, I back off on the magnification on the microscope so I can see where on the specimen I've got to line up. Because when you're looking to find 3.5 mil through the super macro lens, it could be a little bit tough sometimes. You're doing it all by eye. And see, that's Doug, that's well stuck to the mineral tack. That takes a fair bit to actually pull it off. So it's pretty stable.
If you have a vertical setup, a bowl of rice will do.
Correct. I don't. But we'll talk about that shortly anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
I've got a similar thing that I use, but it's less high tech. It's
Mine's not high tech.
compared to this, it is. This is one of those little plastic Easter eggs,
Yes.
but filled with plaster on one half and cut off on the bottom, so you can just orient it like your magnet, but uses friction instead of magnet to keep it in place.
Well, the good thing with the magnet, because those things are so strong, that is one part that just does not move at all. So once you've got it in place, that's it. It's well and truly stuck. So that's probably I've lost somebody coming back in. That's probably pretty much all I was going to share about mine, at least initially. Any questions on my setup other than what we've had?
Do you have any trouble with the lens sagging and having vibration because there's so much of a lever moment there?
No. So if I just, if you had a look at the photo, I'll just bring that back up just for a second. Yeah, somebody said something in chat. Okay.
Or does your rail support it?
Yeah, I'll just show you what I actually do. So where are we? Right, so you can see here that the camera is sitting pretty well in the middle of that book.
Mm-hmm.
Under the lens, I'll just stop share. Under the front of the lens, I actually have another high-tech one, just a stack of business cards, just enough to keep it at a horizontal level. So, and if you change lens, it doesn't matter because it's underneath the extension tubes, unless you take all of the extension tubes off. So,
What are you using a rail?
no, I did use a rail for a while. I showed a photo before where I had the camera on a tripod, on a rail on a tripod, but I just found it so difficult to use because of vibration. It just did nothing for me. So I ended up getting rid of it.
So how do you stack?
I moved the specimen on that three-way micrometer, because you're only moving, like that has movement up to 10 millimeters. That's your depth of field. When you're working at that sort of magnification, you don't need much depth of field. So as long as you wind it back again before you start the next one, you've got plenty of room to actually move it. And it's solid because that's clamped in a vise on the side of the desk as well. So there's very little movement.
Before I went to using a rail, I had the camera set up on a Newport stage with a metric micrometer on it. That if you were glutton for punishment, you could move in 10,000ths of a millimeter, or thousandths of a millimeter rather.
I use a rail too, which goes from 1 to 1,000 microns.
But it's when you get arthritis in your thumb, that gets old when you run on a stack.
Well, they do have automated ones.
Well, I've got a stack shot now. There's so I don't make people seasick here.
Okay.
That's the camera with a stack shot on it. Let me get this out a little farther.
Quite a contraption.
It's actually portable too. I took it to our local mineral show, which unfortunately was canceled again this year. I've got a X and Y stage under that chunk of plywood. And this little piece is a rotary stage, but it's manual. Don't need to lock it down because it's real stiff. And then I've got a piece in here from the end of this rail, it comes out and snugs up against the lens to keep it from flopping around. And the lens that's on there, it's a Canon 90D 32 megapixel camera, and that's our 70 to 200 L series zoom lens. I recently tried to switch over to using just a regular tube lens with build up from extension tubes, and got them all lined, and tried to, I was going to use the Raynox as the actual tube lens for the microscope objectives, but I've never got that to work very well. And I noticed that a number of people had posted on Mindat using those extension tubes in a Raynox have a diaphragm in the system. And I think that's probably where I'm losing the sharpness that I'd like to get. And I have not, there's an adapter ring that I need that I've searched and searched and searched and can't find anywhere. I can find a 38.5 millimeter on the one side that I need 38 millimeter on. I haven't found one that's got the two correct sizes. So I went back to the telephoto lens. And actually a 200 millimeter fixed lens would be better, but I'd have to look on the used market for that. And I'm kind of leery about buying used stuff. I don't know if
I got mine on eBay, and you can lose a lot. You can buy a lot of crappy ones and not worry too much about it if you don't pay too much in the first place. And then you get a good one and you're set. I think I paid $80 for my 200 millimeter fixed lens. I mean, it was probably 50 years old, and it works fine. I kind of modified it so I could clamp it into my setup and not worry about it. But for $80, I'm not worried about ripping part of the casing off of a Nikon lens that probably cost $500 new.
I originally started out shooting through my Mejai EMZ5 TR microscope, and I've still got a few of those 1920 or 20,001 images on Mindat, and they look like crap. It was a digital camera. I was doing stacking, but at the time, finally talking with people and all, a microscope that's good for your eyeballs and is a $1,200 microscope doesn't necessarily give you good photo images.
Yeah.
At the time, the guys that were taking good photos through the microscope were buying those Zeiss Discovery, V8s to V20s, and I could just about buy the house for one of those. So I went from that to a horizontal setup, which is using the vertical rail that I've got here, and this manual stage. The thing I didn't like about the horizontal was I found it more difficult to get lighting in places because I ended up with more obstructions around, and also things sagging. So I switched everything over to vertical, and I've been pretty happy with that since then. I'm using a 5X and a 10X Mitutoyo implant apo, and that gives me either a 2 millimeter or a 5 millimeter field of view. And I find that with the 10X, I can crop something down to where I have, like a 0.8 millimeter field of view and still have a reasonably good image. And I've also keep
all sounds very complicated to me. Mine's much more simple than that.
Yeah, me too.
I don't know to show you mine. This will work. I don't know. There's the rig. Somewhere there.
Yeah, down a bit probably.
There, down a bit. Light in there. Let's turn this light out.
Down a bit, Martin.
You use books too, I see.
Is that there? Yeah. So the top you see from the side, got Canon 1100D on the top.
Can't hear you, Martin.
Sorry. Canon 1100.
Can't see it either.
Can you see that?
Yeah,
Yeah, parts of it, parts.
Tell me when.
bit more, down a bit, down a bit,
No,
down a bit.
no, that's too much light.
Get that light out of the way, Plonker. That's better. No, down a bit,
No.
down a bit. That's it. Bit
I'll
more.
be on the floor in a minute. So
No,
I got
come on.
1100D camera up, Canon up there.
Not good for your knees.
Canon
then.
bellows. Ring light on there. I got
Can't hear.
We can't hear you, Martin.
Okay, I'll come out then and go in.
Yeah.
Oh,
We got as far as ring light.
ring light, yeah. I use these two lights here as supplementary lights just to get a bit more light in, but I find the ring light there's enough light coming in.
Yeah.
The way I use the bellows because I can control my field of view in one movement rather than keep chopping and changing lenses over. And for bigger pieces, I've got this.
Yeah.
This lens here is a Sigma 150 millimeter macro lens, and I just reverse that onto the rig. I can go from 1 centimeter to about 4 centimeters field of view. I can then still start. I've got a wee macro rail down the back. This is all wired through to this little lot on here, and it just all works very simply. I have no problem. The only problem I've got is getting a photograph of a bigger mineral. I can't take a picture of a big mineral properly.
You just need. I can share my. Sorry, yes, okay.
Keep it simple.
I can share my screen, and I made a picture of my setup this afternoon.
I've got a picture, but I can't find it.
Okay.
Yep, go for it. No, not yet. But
All right.
while you're doing that, Henk, Becca, just to answer your question, there's basically, I think, three main ones. There's Combine Z or Combine Z if you're American, Zarine Stacker and Helicon Focus. I personally tried Combine Z originally and didn't get any benefit from it at all. I used Zarine for many, many years, but I've since changed to Helicon. And Helicon has a couple of things in it that are just put it far ahead of even Zarine now. Dust map is one in particular. Most cameras have a little bit of dust on the sensor that shows up in some instances little trails of dots on your final image. And this actually maps them and allows you to not have to worry about it. I mean, most people would use post-production to remove them, but when you've got to do it,
Helicon?
that's Helicon, yeah.
I've never found that one, that feature.
Set dust map.
Yeah, set dust map. But what you've got to do is you've got to take a photo just of a piece of code. I've actually got one I can show. Henk, are you still struggling with your share screen?
No, I just have to. I'm just waiting to set it on.
Oh, you do that, and then I'll bring this up after.
Right. This one. Can see it?
Yes, we
Oh,
can. Yes.
Right. Well, as you can see, I also work horizontally, and I use the Canon D90 camera, I've got 3 lenses, and this is the Laowa 25 millimeters. This small thing is just about 10 centimeters, but you can, of course, you can extend it. Together with some extension rings that you can see here. I've also a Laowa 100 millimeters macro lens. This one goes up to 5 times the magnification, and the other 100 millimeters goes up to 2. So that's give me a range which is quite large. And this ring here, this thing, is used to stabilize the whole contraption on the macro rail. This is the stag rail, and the whole thing is what's it called in English? Controlled by the computer. This I use a soft box for lighting. Here's a hole because it has to lose warmth, but around it there's a LED lighting which I can increase or decrease. And this is an external ring light that I can it's just adjusted to the table. It's a LED on Kelvin 5500, so it's daylight, and also that has a button here, but also can increase or decrease the amount of light. The specimen holder here, that's it's 1/2 of an ice spoon, an ice cream spoon filled with some raisin, and with blue tag on it. And this is a magnet, and for placing it on the right height, I use high-tech beer trays. You can see them here. So that gives me all the possibilities to maintain the specimen as just as I wanted. This is controlled by Helicon remote, and the stacking is done by Helicon Focus. And then afterwards, I still use Lightroom and PS camera and some other programs to adjust everything. But together with this lens, I can, if I use the maximum magnification, I can make pictures of objects of about 0.3 millimeters. 0.2 is tricky, but 0.3 is not impossible. And if things are larger than 3 millimeters, then I have to use the other lens, because this is an ultra macro lens, which is has a range which that's only for very small objects. So I use the other lens when the objects are a little larger. That's about it, I think. Yeah. Okay. Actually, this is just let's say, a quite simple thing. It's a camera and a stag rail. That's it. So if I look at the complex things that Doug uses, for instance, and I think this is a simple setup.
That's good.
Okay.
Thanks, Henk.
Okay.
All right. I'll get you to stop share. Okay. And I'll just bring up this one. So on here, you should be able to see basically a grey box. This is the dust map that I actually bring in when I'm running my stacks. And you can see, if I just expand this, you can see these little splotty areas here. Every single one of those is dust on the sensor. And you can see there's quite a lot. And the more you magnify, the more start to appear. And depending on the area of the photo, it's always in the same area on the photo, but depending on the brightness or the color of that particular area, you may see more or less if you don't use the dust map. But by bringing that in, it actually gets rid of the vast majority of those automatically.
Does it get rid of the hot pixels too?
Yeah, yep. Yeah, hot pixels too. So it's really good. It's probably one of the best differentials between them, between that and Zareen. The other one for me was performance. Zareen was taking forever to run, and this one just runs quite quickly. So much.
Silicon can take advantage of the image processing in your graphics card. So if you have a modern graphics card, it can really speed it up.
Yeah, well, I think I went from maybe taking as long as 2.5 hours for one photo to I can do it in 15 minutes. So
yeah,
much, including any post-processing. So it was chalk and cheese for me. That's the pay. I use the paid version, but it's not expensive. It's a lifetime license. So yeah, been pretty happy with that. All right.
I've got some pictures I can share of my setup if you,
that would be
want
good.
to go now.
Go for it, Bruce.
All right. This share screen. Now, where does that share screen go? Oh, there it is.
Put an ice cream? Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
This is my original setup where I was doing it horizontally. Like Doug, I use a Newport stage, but instead of having a hand crank, I put a motor on it, a stepper motor on it. And let's see here, that didn't right, did it? Is that showing up?
It hasn't moved.
Okay. Yeah, I did it wrong. Too many things open at once. All right, just a sec here. This didn't. There we go. Okay. There we go. So this is the way I used to do it when I did it horizontally, and you can see that stepper motor and the linear stage there. I had a little lab jack to set the specimen on and a bunch of LED lights. All of the electronics here is a little microcontroller that I put together to control that stepper and do the actual stepping. It has a bunch of timing set up in it, because why go and buy a ready package when you can spend 3 times as much money and way more time creating your own? I did it because I could. That's just the way I am. I did have some problems with flex and vibration with this. I started using flash attachments for my lighting, and that got rid of the vibration issue because it's such a quick bit of light, and the flash all fastens into the microcontroller as well. You can see I've got a diffuser wrapped around the specimen so that it could, so I don't have the issue with glare quite so much. A few years ago, I decided I wanted to try a vertical system, and I like it much better. There are no issues with flex, and the vibration is much lower. And it's also easier to mount the specimen. I don't have to have it perched so that the good face is going horizontal. I'm not using the LEDs for actually taking the photo. I'm using flash for that. These are for setting up the image. I often will use white cards to help reflect the light into the vugs or whatever. But all of the stacking platform and everything is back here between this manually adjustable height and the camera ring. The whole thing is mounted. Like I say, I ripped the front shroud off of this telephoto lens so that I could put it in this ring. So it's mounted in there pretty solidly. And then there's a Mitutoyo objective fastened onto the front of that lens, which seems crazy, but it works. I also have a 5X Mitutoyo as well as this 10X if I want larger field of view. The 10X gives me 3.6 millimeters onto this full-size sensor, and the other one gives me 7.2. So that's what I'm doing today. And that little, all of that electronics now lives in this nice case down at the bottom, so it doesn't attract the cats. All right.
That's good. Thank you. If you look behind me over there in particular, you can see I don't have a lot of spare space in my room. So having a vertical rig would be just about impossible for me, but I get by quite okay with what I do. Lighting seems to be an interesting one as well. I know I only use the 144 LED ring light, which is dimmable. And I use one of these on my microscope as well. So that sits on the front of the lens, which means that I don't have to worry too much about getting enough light in. But I do occasionally have the problem where there'll be too much glare in one spot or whatever. But you know, minor adjustments of the angle of the specimen and whatever usually fixes that. So you use LEDs. Hank, you use a combination of lights. Richard, where's Richard? Richard, what do you use for yours?
Yeah, I'm here. I use GU10 LED lights. They're spots, but you can make them work by just moving them off the specimen, and you get plenty of light there. It also quite often cuts out a lot of the glares.
Yeah.
I can't use a ring light on mine because the lens is too narrow.
Oh, okay.
Because I've got like what Frank's got, the Mitutoyos.
Yeah, yeah.
But I'm working on a way. There's one particular problem I think I might have identified in that my lights are fixed, but the specimen moves. So obviously, if you had a rounded specimen, the light could shift position very slightly as you move it up and down. Now, I haven't proved it conclusively, but I suspect that might be some of the fuzziness around the crystals.
Yeah.
That might be the reason for that.
It certainly creates chaos with a transparent crystal.
Yeah.
Because you get the refractions going at different angles.
Yeah, I can't find any light enough to attach to the platform, because currently when the Wii macro moves, the platform wobbles.
If I were, I would try to find a soft box, which that's a box in which the camera lens is placed, and the lights all around the specimen. So there's nothing that moves, and you can the clarity or the brightness, you can arrange that with the lights, but it's very smooth and very slow. So you can try to get rid of any reflection, because the light is all around. So my experience is that you should not use light which is spotted, but you should use light that's all around the.
There's something I'm looking at, but at the moment with my setup, it's not easy to do.
Sometimes it looks good, sometimes it doesn't, though.
Yeah,
that goes for all of us, I think.
Yeah.
My problem is that I'm also shooting larger stuff. I've been using this lately, which, it's just like too many. It's I don't know, 100 LEDs in there. You can change the color and all that, but I can, and I've got some sort of thing that I can adjust where it is, and it's all on a magnetic base. But my bigger problem is that I'm shooting fluorescence often, and so trying to get the shortwave light in there is just impossible. Without taking just a really long exposure and then stacking with a long exposure. Yeah.
I've done it, but it's.
But I have other things that there's other magnetic holders that I'll hold a convoy and you can aim it in there. But of course, that's that's not shortwave. But there's a lot of stuff to diffuse. Like, this is a white light, but I can put this diffuser on it and it'll work, or there's other stuff. And I've seen Jeff Scoville's approach, and he has white cards and reflective cards all over whenever he's shooting anything. But when you're trying to get really close like you guys are doing, I guess the ring light is really the only way.
Well, it works for me, but
the flash works for me, but it has has issues.
But a lot of times I would think the specimen itself is blocking the light. It isn't a bug.
Only if it's a really, really deep bug. For me,
You want to get as much working distance from the lens to the specimen as you can, and then that becomes less of an issue.
I think my problem is I'm using a 40 millimeter macro, and I have a 100 millimeter macro, but it seems to be broken, so I'll have to figure that out.
It's funny about that. My 100 mil macro died last week. Just stopped working. It's only about 1,200 US to replace or something. So I won't be replacing it. I've had about 15 years out of it, so it's not bad. It's getting on a bit just after 7, but before we close this session, or before I go to sort of general questions, Rod, can I just get you to just quickly talk about yours, because yours is quite a different setup to what most other people use.
Yeah, I'm just going to see if I can try and turn the camera around and see if we can excuse the mess.
That's a diffuser.
Yeah, I don't know that it's gonna. Yeah, I can't really get a good photo of it, but basically I use a CMOS sensor, which is a Chinese one, and as Steve said, that some of the I'm only using a 5 megapixel. Most of these Chinese CMOS sensors, they advertise them at 12, 15, 20, 30, 50 megapixel. They ain't anywhere near that. But you basically have to look at what your pixel size is. Gives you a fairly good idea of what they're talking about. Some of these things they advertise and say, oh, this is a 32 megapixel camera, and when you look at pixel size, in actual fact, you're only going to get about a 3 megapixel picture out of it. But I shoot in TIFF. I use a bellows and a 4x Nikon plan objective. You might be able to actually just see my diffusers on my LEDs are actually single serve plastic ice cream containers that work very well. And I also have a little bit of diffused plastic that I can actually just fit over the specimen as well, just to give a bit more. And the other thing that I've done as well is I managed to pick up an old Nikon polarizing microscope that the whole turret had been destroyed by students. So I've actually cut the top off, and I've mounted my setup there on the Nikon now. And of course, the good thing about that is they actually have a fine tuning, so you can actually move your fine tuning knob by 1 megapixel at a time, which is really good, and especially for a bit of arthritis, nice big knobs to move, and it's almost now I can feel what is a 5 micron movement, 10 micron, just when you're doing 4 or 5 stacked shots a night, you very soon get into the thing that you can just almost feel how many microns you're moving each time.
Yeah, I agree with that.
The biggest problem I have with it is that I can really only shoot small. That my 5 megapixel setup runs from with full extension of the bellows and extension tubes, it comes to about 0.7 of a millimeter field of view, and it'll go out to 6.6 at a fully collapsed bellows. If I use the 3 megapixel camera, I can go out to 7.6. And I've also got on the 3 megapixel camera, it actually came with a sort of like a Barlow lens, which I think is a 0.5, and it was set up for use on a microscope. And I can actually put that on the camera and put it inside the holder I have, and I get 11 or 12, but the real problem with that is field of view is, the depth of field is so small. And so when I'm shooting something that size, it's extremely hard to get a good quality picture out, and there gets a lot of bleeding, and I'm not really happy. Software is my biggest issue. The 5 megapixel camera won't work with the Amscope software, which is the Amscope software is really good for under CMOS camera. But the Chinese Haier software is pretty basic. You can't really set a good white balance on it. You can't change your target on there. It's so, especially with metallic minerals, it's just murder trying to get a decent photo. And I agree about the lights. I actually changed out the table on my microscope, on the photographic microscope, and I've actually put an Olympus XY stage on there, which makes it really good for finding exactly where I want. And I pinched the cat's ball, a clip that actually came off a sparkle, and that actually makes just a nice thing. But by far and away, the best thing about my whole setup was I set it up in what was an old water tank. So I've got 6-inch thick solid concrete walls all around me. I think it was designed to hold about 300 ton of water. So double-decker buses can go past our place, and I don't get a scrap of vibration anywhere.
Or small earthquakes.
Yeah, about earthquakes, which, yeah. But yeah, I'm not overly happy. There's lots of bits and pieces, and I'm actually thinking of actually changing my stacking software as well. But I'm using Helicon. I'm using Helicon. So I'm thinking of trying Zareen to see if I get any better results. But yeah, it's not bad. I'd love to use the stacking rail. The big problem is that you have to write your own program to actually run the macro or stack rail, or to run a CMOS sensor off it. So I'll wait until there's a commercial program, I think.
Doesn't the rail just move the way you want it to, or? I thought we macro had its own software controller, no?
No, it's always controlled by the computer. So
it's the camera interface I think he's talking about to turn the shutter.
Yeah.
Oh. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, the macro software will only work with certain cameras, as I understand it. I've talked to the developer a couple of times, and he said knows that there are people who have written their own software to control a CMOS camera, but they've got no interest in developing it at the moment because there's not enough interest. But with a commercial camera, you're paying a heck of a lot for that you're not actually using in most cases. And it's certainly a lot of weight on your setup.
So has anybody felt like right now the industry is moving towards these mirrorless cameras? So does that mean that there's a lot of older DSLRs that work fine available that are cheaper?
I think it's a race between them falling apart and newer stuff coming in.
I mean, I have 20-year-old DSLRs that work fine, but I still use them.
But if you're taking 5,000 images a day for your stacking, it kind of wears them out pretty fast. Yeah. Even the professional models like what I have, I wore out a Nikon D5 or D3 doing stacking, and hopefully this replacement I have will last for quite a while. But I found that really good quality mirrorless are really expensive right now too. So.
The other thing I noticed on some of those mirrorless cameras, the remote option to have your software run the camera requires a wireless connection. They don't have the remote connection that most of the standard DSLRs have.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the mirrorless have them, but not all of them.
Yeah, actually, that reminds me. There's a couple of other things that should talk about as well in terms of settings. So, obviously, with any camera that you're using, you want to be able to have manual focus, not automatic focus. ISO setting, I find that leaving it on, Kathy, leave it on 100 because that gives you the crispest. And when you're actually stacking, it doesn't matter because your depth of field and your exposure times, you're in a controlled environment. And your aperture settings, which, as I said, with the super macro, I leave mine on f5.6, which I find is the sweet spot for that particular lens. But they're all important things as well. Kathy, you've just joined us right at the end. You missed out on daylight saving. Do we have any questions? Have people found this a useful session?
Yeah, we should do it periodically. I think that the back and forth is really good. I've got a few ideas to work with.
Yeah, good.
Well, it's very useful, I think, but I would like if every one of us prepares one aspect of photography, so we can discuss things in depth a bit more. That would be nice, I think.
All right, we might look at doing that as one of the upcoming sessions.
Homework.
Yeah, exactly. Your task, should you choose to accept it, is.
Not your.
Jim Glenn's just joining us as well. Oh, I did say.
Some I noticed.
You did.
You did say.
I like using the Google, or I mean the Zoom feature to add it to your Google Calendar because then I know it's right.
Exactly.
Interesting thing with my Google Calendar is the next session is at 10 p.m. in UK.
Jim, sorry, Jim, you've just joined us at the tail end, unfortunately. So I think we definitely need to have a stacking one of these as well. Because there's so much in stacking, and I know a number of us have picked up various tips and tricks on the way as well.
Definitely.
I've heard things.
No idea what all those features, how to set them.
Yeah, I don't use all of them by any stretch.
But just the numbers at the bottom, the two numbers that Helicon Focus comes up with, I'm like, what do they even mean?
I know. And the documentation they have for it is worthless.
Yeah, exactly.
There's no way to go from what they're telling you to any useful guidance on that.
I think basically what you do is you start off with what the default settings are, and if it works, you leave it alone. If you have particular errors, then you tweak things and just see what the difference is that it makes if you've got time to do it. But
How many ice creams left?
About 2 or 3.
sorry, I'm just muting Dick, so we don't have to have the ice cream discussion.
Pass them out.
All right. Any other questions?
I got one comment on it. When Bruce was showing his setup, he had an adapter plate in there that's made by Chris Hegnar. And for people in the US and Canada, if you've got something custom you need made in the way of clamps and all for photo setups, he's a good person to go to, provided you can give him the drawings to fit up with what you have.
I'm not sure what plate you're talking about because I got everything. I made the clamp for my lens, and I
well, there's one that had the there's one in there that had the Hegnar HEJNAR on it.
Huh.
What?
Not on mine. I got some. Maybe I don't know. Maybe I got mine off of eBay. You mean for the Mitutoyo to the lens?
It would be one. It
Adapter?
would be a clamp or a rail piece. It's for mounting all the.
Sure wasn't Hank.
No, not me. I made my own because I'm that way. I'm that guy who can't spend money on something if I can spend twice as much to build it myself.
See, these are fat fingers. I can't do that.
I have these.
Steve, I have a comment about the little holders that you were doing. Because of my Parkinson's, I have problems too. So found these little balls pre-made.
Pre-made?
They're made by bulbhead. And I mean, they're small enough that they don't take up too much space and limit if you have limited throw on your microscope between the table and the lens.
Could you repeat that? Bulbhead.com? Is that?
BULB. I'll put it in the chat.
Okay. Thank you.
Right.
Okay.
Okay. Well, I'm off then.
All right, Martin. Thank you very much for your participation as well.
That was not very good tonight, but I'll try and make it better next time.
All right, that'll be your homework then.
Do your homework.
Yeah, I've actually got a YouTube clip of what I did it, how I did it, but I don't think if that worked very well.
Yeah, YouTube tends to be a little bit iffy on Zoom, unfortunately.
I taught a guy over in Brazil how to get himself all set up in it, and I did it but from the YouTube clip. I took a picture of myself. I filmed myself doing it and then described it to him, and he got himself working okay.
But that's why it didn't work very well, Martin, because you took a picture of yourself.
Well, yeah, the camera broke.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm off.
All right.
I'll see some of you guys on Friday.
Yeah, all right, Martin. Yep. See you Friday.
Yeah. Take care.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Okay. So we might close the session for today. And Jim, if you want to hang on, and we'll have a chat about options afterwards. Thanks, everybody.